Canada is celebrated for its Olympic triumphs, hockey legends, and thriving grassroots sports culture. But beneath the applause lies a disturbing truth. The Canadian sports system is broken. This is not about isolated incidents. It's a systemic failure, one that has left athletes vulnerable to widespread abuse, neglect, and intimidation. Survivors report physical punishment, verbal humiliation, sexual harassment, and exclusion from programs for minor mistakes. Children as young as 8 describe trembling before practices, fearing a coach's wrath. In elite programs, where the stakes are highest, athletes recount environments where medals mattered more than their safety, and speaking up could mean the end of a career. Fear was the strongest weapon in the system. Coaches and officials exploited positions of trust, knowing oversight was minimal and accountability rare. Complaints often went unanswered. Repeat offenders retained influence. Governance was fragmented across provinces and national organizations, creating a culture that protected perpetrators while punishing victims. Funding structures prioritized results over welfare. A coach could secure sponsorships or high-level placements by producing victories, not by fostering safe and ethical programs. This incentive structure encouraged silence, compliance, and concealment of abusive behavior. The abuse spanned verbal, emotional, and physical domains. Some athletes endured public humiliation during competitions. Others were subjected to exclusionary practices that left them isolated and anxious. Testimonies revealed that maltreatment was normalized. Young athletes learned to internalize fear, believing that resistance would cost them their dreams. This system failure is not abstract. It has tangible consequences. Careers were derailed, families traumatized, communities lost trust in programs they once celebrated. The commission gathered over 1,000 testimonies, each adding another layer to the hidden network of abuse. Patterns emerged. Power concentrated in unmonitored hands, complaints suppressed, and safety protocols inconsistent or non-existent. The crime here is not a single act, but a persistent, pervasive failure of governance and ethics. It erodes trust, compromises well-being, and threatens Canada's reputation as a leader in sport. Every trophy, every medal, comes with the shadow of a system that too often valued performance over people. Understanding this context is critical. The story is not just about abuse. It's about how a national system can fail millions silently over decades. And the Commission's findings serve as a stark warning. If reforms aren't enacted, Canada's athletes will continue to pay the price. The consequences of Canada's broken sports system extend far beyond the gym, rink, or training facility. The abuses uncovered by the Commission didn't just harm individual athletes. They sent shockwaves through families, communities, and the very culture of Canadian sport. For athletes, the trauma was immediate and enduring. Many quit the sport they once loved, carrying with them the weight of fear, shame, and isolation. A 14-year-old gymnast recalled practicing alone late at night, her hands trembling from anxiety, unsure if a misstep would trigger humiliation or punishment. Teen hockey players spoke of locker rooms where verbal abuse was routine, coaches wielding authority like a weapon. The psychological scars left by these experiences can last a lifetime, shaping relationships, self-esteem, and mental health. Families, too, were caught in the fallout. Parents invested time, money, and trust into programs they believed were safe. Yet, instead of nurturing growth, many watched helplessly as their children endured mistreatment. Trust, once implicit in the coach-athlete relationship, was shattered. Some families withdrew entirely from sport, fearing exposure to further harm. Communities that had prided themselves on local programs now faced the uncomfortable truth. Their institutions were failing the very youth they aimed to protect. The ripple effect also extends to the wider sporting ecosystem. Funding, sponsorship, and media attention depend on integrity and public trust. When abuse and maltreatment surface, confidence erodes. Local clubs lose members. National organizations face scrutiny. Athletes' performance may suffer under the weight of unspoken trauma, and a generation of talent can be stunted before it even reaches elite levels. Beyond the individuals directly affected, the scandal threatens Canada's reputation internationally. partners, federations, and competitors question whether Canadian sport programs prioritize excellence or perpetuate harm. The fallout is not abstract. It affects medal prospects, program credibility, and the global perception of Canada's commitment to safe and ethical sport. Perhaps most insidious is the cultural impact. A generation of young athletes grows up learning that fear, silence, and compliance are expected. Respect and discipline become intertwined with intimidation. Winning, achievement, and opportunity are too often conditional on enduring abuse. This creates a self-perpetuating cycle where harm is normalized and ethical boundaries erode over time. The ripple effect is systemic, psychological, and generational. It's not just about missed opportunities or damaged bodies. It's about broken trust, lost confidence, and a culture of fear that touches every corner of Canadian sport. The story of Canada's broken sport system only comes into full focus when the investigation begins. Led by Justice Lise Maisonneuve, the Federal Commission embarked on a mission to uncover decades of hidden abuse, systemic failures, and cultural negligence. What they found was both shocking and revealing. The problem was far more pervasive than anyone had imagined. The investigation involved over 1,000 interviews with athletes, families, coaches, whistleblowers, and officials across every level of sport in Canada. Survivors recounted harrowing experiences, stories of intimidation, physical punishment, and sexual harassment that had been ignored, suppressed, or minimized. Each account revealed a piece of a larger puzzle, a network of negligence, concealment, and complicity that had allowed abuse to flourish unchecked. Investigators examined archival documents, confidential complaints, and financial records. Patterns emerged. Organizations often retained individuals with prior allegations. Complaints were filed but never investigated. And safety protocols were inconsistent across provinces. Even governing bodies designed to protect athletes often failed, prioritizing medals, reputation, and funding over safety. The Commission uncovered a chilling culture of fear and silence. Athletes feared retaliation or public scrutiny, while families hesitated to challenge authority, believing the system would protect insiders. Coaches and officials exploited this silence, knowing their positions insulated them from accountability. The investigation revealed that power and privilege were weaponized, allowing abuse to persist for years without consequence. One of the most striking revelations was the systemic nature of the failures. These weren't isolated incidents or rogue individuals. The abuse was embedded in the structural and cultural DNA of Canadian sport. The Commission found that governance fragmentation, underfunded oversight, and a singular focus on performance created the perfect environment for harm to go unnoticed. The investigation also illuminated how widespread maltreatment undermines athlete development. Fear and stress affected performance, confidence, and mental health. Some talented athletes left the sport entirely, their potential erased, while others continued under duress, enduring a silent, invisible battle. After months of hearings, testimonies, and cross-examination, the Commission produced a report with 98 calls to action. These included creating centralized oversight, implementing mandatory reporting, conducting background checks, and establishing a public registry of sanctioned individuals. Each recommendation was designed to dismantle the culture of silence and ensure that future athletes would be safe, supported, and heard. The moment of reckoning arrived when the Commission's findings were made public. The report didn't just detail abuse and neglect. It exposed a system that had failed athletes for decades, and it sent shockwaves through Canada's entire sporting ecosystem. Organizations, officials, and coaches suddenly found themselves under intense scrutiny, their reputations, careers, and authority challenged. Across provinces, officials were removed or suspended. Programs once celebrated for excellence now faced harsh criticism. Some high-profile coaches resigned amid public pressure. Others were formally sanctioned. For families and survivors, these consequences validated their experiences, offering long-delayed acknowledgement of the suffering endured and signaling that the system could no longer protect perpetrators. But consequences weren't limited to individuals. Institutions, from grassroots clubs to national sport organizations, were forced to implement sweeping reforms. Policies that had been ignored or inconsistently enforced were rewritten, complaint mechanisms strengthened, and mandatory reporting protocols established. Funding structures were re-evaluated to ensure that athlete welfare would finally be treated as a priority, not an afterthought. The Commission's recommendations also prompted national conversations about culture and accountability. Media coverage amplified survivors' voices, bringing attention to maltreatment that had previously been hidden behind closed doors. Sponsors and government bodies demanded transparency, tying future funding to measurable reforms and compliance with ethical standards. Some of the most dramatic consequences were symbolic yet powerful. Facilities displayed posters about athlete rights, training programs incorporated education on abuse prevention, and whistleblower protections were strengthened. These changes created visible markers of accountability, signaling to athletes, families, and coaches that systemic reform was underway. Yet, the moment of consequence also highlighted the fragility of change. Cultural habits don't shift overnight. Power dynamics still exist, and the pressure to produce results can still incentivize silence. The report's release was only the first step in a long process of transformation, a wake-up call for an entire system. For athletes, these consequences were more than institutional. They were deeply personal. Survivors saw the people who had harmed them removed from positions of influence. Young athletes now have the reassurance that their complaints will be heard and investigated. And families can finally trust that participation in sport no longer requires compromising safety for opportunity. The release of the Commission's report marked not just an investigation, but a turning point for Canadian sport. The endgame is not about punishment alone. It is about transformation, accountability, and the future of athlete safety. The revelations were a wake-up call. Decades of negligence, abuse, and systemic failure cannot continue without consequence. And the only path forward is structural reform. For survivors, the endgame is personal and profound. Those who had suffered in silence finally see their experiences validated. Policies that once existed only on paper are now being enforced. Training programs emphasize ethics, respect, and safety alongside performance. Whistleblowers are being empowered, knowing that their courage can protect future generations of athletes. What once seemed like a culture of fear is slowly being replaced with accountability and vigilance. At an institutional level, the endgame is more complex. Organizations face the challenge of rebuilding trust while implementing reforms that may be unpopular or disruptive. Governance structures must unify, ensuring that national and provincial bodies operate under consistent ethical standards. Oversight mechanisms must be permanent and transparent, leaving no room for complacency or selective enforcement. Sponsors, government bodies, and communities are watching closely. Funding, credibility, and the reputation of Canadian sport now depend on visible, measurable change. The broader societal impact cannot be understated. The scandal has ignited conversations about ethics in sport, athlete welfare, and the responsibilities of coaches, officials, and administrators. Canadians are beginning to understand that sports are not just about medals, trophies, or national pride. They are about the safety, dignity, and growth of the people who dedicate their lives to them. The endgame challenges the country to redefine what success truly means in sport. It is no longer acceptable to prioritize results over human well-being. Yet, the endgame is also a warning. Without vigilance, the same patterns could re-emerge. Cultural habits are slow to change, and power dynamics remain entrenched. The Commission's recommendations provide a blueprint, but implementation depends on commitment, transparency, and an unwavering focus on integrity. For audiences, families, and athletes, the lesson is clear. Change is possible, but it requires collective responsibility. The Canadian sports system can become a model for safety and ethical governance worldwide, or it can remain vulnerable to the very abuses that have plagued it for decades. Cinematic cut suggestion. Sweeping aerial shots of Canadian sports arenas, athletes training under new safety protocols, survivors smiling in interviews, interspersed with slow motion of empty gyms and reflective moments. Overlay text, accountability, reform, the future of sport. This is the final chapter of a system exposed, challenged, and forced to confront itself. The Canadian sports system is broken, but the story does not end with failure. It ends with the possibility of redemption, reform, and a safer future for all athletes.